Although Bolivian, I am not indigenous. I lived a very different life from theirs. But growing up, indigenous cultures, the Amazon rainforest, and wildlife have always had and continue to have an important place in my life. After the Amazonian fires and global warming threatening the forest, producing massive migrations of natives and the extinction of animals, one thing is certain: we cannot reproduce the things we already have. So, what are the questions we need to ask ourselves? This situation is a result of the way we treat the earth, nature, humans, and the relationship between us all. The search for new objects which are neither city nor architecture, which would mix hybrids in search of synergies pacifying our relationship to otherness, leads me to seek a hybrid architecture-nature. But what is a hybrid architecture-nature? So that this project is not a dream, I frame it in a situation that I know. I decided to look into one of the areas of the Amazon jungle that was burnt down, but the surroundings are still wild, with indigenous people and wild animals living there. My project is located on the border of the department of Santa Cruz and Beni, next to a refuge of wild animals. Previously, a land where the Guarani natives lived, this area is now a mixture of Mennonites, farmers from the city, and Guarani people living together. It is here, in the Amazon, in an area already burnt down that will eventually become a city or agricultural land over time, but where there are wild animals and people who still live there, that I decided to create an architecture which has the chance to resist climate change better than the ones we have now. My work has been to try to create a relationship with space and nature that we do not know or have forgotten about. Living space and nature are symbiotic. It is an architecture that comes from the Amazonian forest, from the mythology of the indigenous population, and from my own mythology. I begin by recognizing typologies that come from nature and which then produce typologies of space. Conceptual and morphological families derived from nature are capable of being transformed into architecture. There are carcasses, invasive elements that serve as connecting elements, emergencies, stratifications, and gourds. There are hollow carcasses made from bamboo guadua that grow in the Amazon. It is a very porous, very airy skin, which will be filled with a translucent and light material, based on bioplastic algae from the Amazon River. Carcasses are structures that are made to be multiple, overgrown. The solid carcasses are more in the register of the roof of the wall. I put dirt on the structure made of concrete shell of mycelium, and then we will wait until it is inhabited. The moss grows on its own. The clay that comes from the soil of the Amazon hardens. The binding elements are somewhat soft species, as if they were secreted by the project. They are very natural. Like the moss that comes to make a connection between the earth, the rocks, and the gourds, because it arises and creates a continuity. The connecting elements proliferate and will cling to the carcass and make the link. They are made from local limestone, mycelium concrete, and clay. As they pass from one space to another, they are able to climb on the hollow carcass as well as on the solid carcass or on the ground. They are effective for talking about travel and circulation. Gourds are the easiest to inhabit because they have a shape that is continuous, where we can put contemporary programs that we already know. Some are woven with recycled plastics. They are objects that resist and are remnants of our world. Emergencies produce singularity and are eruptive typologies. like folds that emerge from the same landscape and form caves there. The stratifications make the link in another way, by superposition and not by invasion. The idea is not to oppose artisanal culture and technology. It would be a question of inventing the craftsmanship that accompanies new technologies. It's a wild, ultra artisanal architecture with places that I envisioned from places that I grew, but I also allow myself to go further with the technology. Architecture's mission is to organize, to answer questions, and to offer us ways of living together. But what gives it its strength is its poetry and its narrative capacity to tell stories. Most often, it tells stories related to the elements or geometry. But in my South American culture, architecture might tell more mythological stories. It is this part that interests me to explore and perpetuate in my project. Architecture tells and keeps the stories of my culture, even if it is not said in the first degree. According to a native legend, a young couple in love could not be together due to their parents' opposition. During their last meeting before they separated, the couple hugged so tightly that they ended up killing each other. And from there was burned the first bibosi tree, which grows on the rocks and on top of other trees like a kind of parasitic tree which surrounds the motaku palm. A story told through one of the atmospheric water collection towers. The natives of the Amazon also tell the story of the pink river dolphins, which change color of the rivers, and which during full moon lights turn into handsome young men. The girls of the village barely resist the melodious singing and end up accompanying them, so much so that they are dragged to the bottom of the rivers. The rivers and the water flowing through the architecture sparkle and shimmer with luminescent plants that purify the waters, inviting you to look deeply into them. A native legend said that these river waters come from the sun, which fell in love with the moon, but would melt it as it approached, and the waters of the moon would melt the earth. The moon cried so much that her tears spilled over the earth. The tears of the moon were returned by the sea because they were fresh water, while the sea water was salty, and then turned into the Amazon River. Rainwater flows freely from my building and is collected and stored for later use, much like moon's tears flow through the earth's landscape. All these relationships with nature and mythologies produce different spaces and forms, but also a new way of using them. We therefore do not necessarily define uses as objectives that we must achieve, but uses as elements that can be assembled indefinitely in various ways. These assemblies produce a natural, habitable microcosm. Each space can have several forms of housing, and some spaces have established programs, and some others remain very natural, intrusive, and sometimes explosive, with interior spaces with fixed programs. These spaces remain natural, without fixed use, at the same time, image of nature, ready to be explored by man and animal alike, and it is up to them to give them a use. Inside the gourds, programs can be interchangeable and change over time. Nature is not programmed. Without going too far in this hypothesis, the gourds welcome what remains of our architecture today. Areas near water is collected and stored can be filled with water, creating pools, basins, baths, and terms. These areas can also accommodate a market, why not both at the same time, or a restaurant, exhibition spaces, or temporary installations can be easily set up too. They are programmatic reserves, such as toilets, restaurant, the kitchen, and more, so that the project speaks to the humans and is habitable for them. I made a choice by working this architecture in its fusion with nature. The choice to understand that man has the capacity to inhabit what is offered to him, unless his actions are imprisoned with an already determined program. The project, therefore, becomes a landscape to be inhabited, which is part of the experience. A series of extremely defined places, very clear in their characteristics, and it is up to everyone to know how to inhabit them. It is not the form, the biology, or the science of the object that makes my project. I am not in an ultra-technological approach, which would only like science to save us. I am in an ultra-human approach, which is that by observing nature and indigenous culture, I notice the lack of know-how. Nature knows how to make spaces that I do not know how to make. How else can I make them? I use the technologies that we already have by looking at the science trends of tomorrow, but in a natural process that does not see the use of technology as a solution and places it elsewhere as the main construction technique, such as having a robot that prints with clay, a drone that pulverizes soil, and a gardener that at the same time plants seeds. Our world is in this state of emergency, of global warming, immigration, and mass extinction of animals because of some of our principles and choices that we made. I propose an objective: to reconcile nature and architecture.